Welcome to the presentation by Greg Bishop on alien writing for the National Museum of Language. I'm Laura Murray. I'm currently the president of the museum, and I just want to give you a little bit of background about our museum. I'm not going to take too much time for that, but the National Museum of Language was established in 1997 as a nonprofit organization. The person who established it was a language specialist with the National Security Agency, and she'd been thinking about establishing a language museum since 1971. And it wasn't until 1997 that we got set up. And we began to have exhibits and do outreach to the community. And then in 2008, we opened up a physical museum in College Park, Maryland, near the University of Maryland, where we had some live exhibits and presentations. But unfortunately, for a number of factors, we weren't financially able to maintain that. And in 2013, we went to a virtual museum status, a transition. And while some people might think that was a step backward, in some ways it was really a step forward for us, because when we became virtual, we were really able to attract people from all over the country and all over the world to our presentations and exhibits. And so we've been moving along well in the virtual status since then. We now have relationships with people all over the United States and in many foreign countries. So that is very enriching for us. So I think I will stop with that. We do have a very broad perspective. One of the things that's somewhat unique about our museum is that we look at language very broadly. There are some other language museums around the world. There's quite a few of them, but most of them focus on just one language, the language of the country where they are founded, or a specific group that they're interested in, talking about. Whereas we talk about sort of universal aspects of language, whether it's how languages are used in society, the teaching of languages, writing systems, preservation of indigenous languages or dying languages, but things that are more universal rather than just specific languages. So we welcome you. If you're new to the National Museum of Language, we hope that you'll take a look at our website and see what we have to offer. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Greg Nedved, who was the prior president of the National Museum of Language, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And I hope everyone can hear me. It's not usually a problem, as I have a pretty loud voice. In addition to being the former president, I'm also the program chair. And I found Mr. Bishop to present. I learned of him through, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing her name wrong, Susan Swiatek, who I believe is the Virginia MUFON director. MUFON is a Mutual UFO Network. I asked her if she knew of anyone who knew about, extraterrestrial, communications, writings, etc. And she recommended Mr. Bishop. And this is an interesting topic for me, by the way, because I'm a professional historian. I'm also interested in UFO sort of as a hobby. And some of you know that I also actually wrote a song about UFOs. But enough on that. I just want to introduce our speaker, Mr. Bishop. And I'm not very clever here. I'm simply going to read what was on our website. In 1991, he co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, conspiracy research, psychedelia, and new science. And from this magazine, he came up with an article called Wake Up Down There, which is a collection of articles, from this magazine. This was published in the year 2000. In 2005, he had a book called Project Beta, where he documented a government campaign of disinformation against a UFO researcher. Another work was called Weird California. I think Mr. Bishop is from California. A portrait of strange and eerie history and places in the Golden State, which is California. That's from the year 2006. In his latest book, It Defies Language, features essays about topics surrounding UFOs and related issues. RadioMysterioso.com features Mr. Bishop's interviews with researchers as well as scientists and academics who are involved in fringe topics. Okay, that's it. I want to turn the podium over to Mr. Bishop and to thank him for agreeing to present. You know, he's a busy guy, and we very much appreciate this. Okay, so I guess we'll just take it from, he can just take it from there.
This is the first time I've given this talk, really, so I would like to, I'll probably read most of it, and I will apologize in advance for reading because it's unprofessional. I don't usually like to do it, but I also don't want to miss anything that I wanted to say. So this talk's on alien writing and possible non-human language. But for the first half of this talk, I want to describe how this interest developed for me and the person that got me interested in it. Also, I think I'd want to beg your indulgence in some of the weird and obscure references to occult methods and techniques, as well as the UFO subject. I tried not to be too inside baseball with them. But the UFO thing has been a core interest of mine since childhood. I've been writing about it, even professionally occasionally, since 1988. I will say up front here and for background that I do think there is an intelligence and a teleology even behind the UFO phenomenon, because I've talked to too many people who've studied and personally experienced this issue to bracket my thinking into something resembling pure objectivity, which who knows if that's even possible. My interest in this started with my friend Mario, who was a clinical psychologist. I think he was kind of a genius and a mystic and maybe even a holy man by some definitions. He wrote to me just out of the blue, and we became friends in the 5 years we had until his untimely death at age 58 in 1999. He taught and encouraged me to pursue my interests in UFOs and occultism so I could better understand what he was doing and the subjects we discussed. So I'm going to try and describe what he told me, how it fits in with his work on alien writing, which is pretty much the only study of the subject around. I think there's one other called How to Talk to an Alien, but that's more about spoken communication with possible aliens. And it's also written from the perspective of somebody who hardcore believes in aliens as extraterrestrial beings, which I do not. I think it's a possibility, but I'm not, you know, I don't know for sure. I don't know anything for sure, except for moral questions. If a scientist does decide to take up something like a cult of the Tarot or something like that, he or she is branded with the kook label, and anything they may say about their field is automatically suspect. Contrary to mass opinion, the high priest of the scientific citadel, the intuitive arts are intimately connected with advances in many fields. I'm sure people here would agree. This issue is explored in the book The Flip by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who's a religious studies scholar at Rice University at Houston. The book describes an experience of opening up to heretofore impossible or discounted areas that have been deemed unscientific or beneath contempt. Dr. Kripal discusses Nobel Prize winning biologist Kary Mullis, who admitted his experience as what's commonly known as an alien encounter. He said he came home one time and he heard noises out in his backyard. He walked out there and he said, a Nobel Prize winning biologist said, what I saw in my backyard was a glowing green raccoon that said, good evening, doctor. And then he said there was some kind of missing time and possibly some encounter with something that wasn't human, which was not the only time for him. If you don't know, Kary Mullis, Dr. Mullis discovered the method of polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, which is the basis of the fast COVID tests that we've experienced in the last few years. So we're usually familiar with a scientist who is suddenly faced with a personal experience which fundamentally changes his or her view of the supposed materialistic structure of nature. The person who can truly appreciate and use all the intellectual and emotional tools that are available to us can begin to evolve human knowledge. And I think this is a sort of pioneer that my friend Mario was. I interviewed him for my magazine for the Excluded Middle, and I took examples of alien writing and I created that graphic for him for the interview. Mario was well aware of the resonance between the arts and the sciences and used it in ways that helped everyone who crossed his path. He used his doctorate as a secret pass, a sort of a secret pass drawing on a mixture of disciplines and interests that not only helped the patients in his practice, but helped him to develop his own personal system of esoteric occult study or magic. This allowed him and his intimates and colleagues to gain more understanding of deeper and higher vistas that artists and occult practitioners are usually familiar with. Mario needed no flip, though. He was a polymath from birth, as I found out. He was born on March 9th, 1940, and grew up in upstate New York, in the lands actually where Joseph Smith claimed to have found golden tablets inscribed with that inscrutable script which became the basis for Mormonism, and where in 1848 the Fox sisters heard ghostly knocks on the walls of their house and gave birth to spiritualism, which as apparently was also a hoax. But it does not mean that everything that happened in that area was a conscious hoax. The region that I was talking about became known as the Burned Over District. I think it was dubbed that in the early 19th century due to the inferno of religious fervor that seemed to sweep through the area. Perhaps the doors to other realities opened wide for Mario because of the geography. His parents immigrated from Italy and brought their children up as Roman Catholics. His mother, Dina, also taught her two daughters and two sons what the Italian community called the old religion, which is what existed before Catholicism, and is still alive in Italy today, actually, no matter how much the church tries to stamp it out. Mario's parents immigrated to the small town of Endicott in New York State after World War II, and where they found themselves was a landscape that resembled the Lake districts of their native northern Italy, which was a welcome thing to them. It was natural in the semi-rural setting to invoke the spirits of their home country. In an interview that I did with Mario, he told me once, describing this old religion, what this is, he said, is a whole system of communication with otherworldly beings, but in the most deadpan, ordinary way you could imagine. So for instance, if you were doing something in the garden and you disturbed a piece of earth, you'd always ask the elemental spirit that inhabited the spot, supposedly, is it okay if I do this? If it isn't, I don't care, but I'll build you this little house off to the side, and that's where you can stay for the summer. So there was an ongoing dialogue at the time. Sometime in the late 40s, Mario and his mother also saw an old-fashioned flying saucer hovering over their backyard, he told me. His brother Peter, who I interviewed for a biography I wrote of Mario, recalled that their parents were often in the strange position of asking their young child for advice. He also helped and comfort whenever it was needed amongst his siblings and friends, all throughout his youth. He seemed to always know what needed to be said or done in any situation to make those around him feel more empowered to help themselves, which is probably why he became a psychologist. He told me that he'd helped to run one of the bad trip tents at Woodstock in 1969, along with members of the local commune and a few Buddhist monks. The monks became his friends, actually. His partner told me that when he died, he had a monk guide him through the Tibetan Bardo states as he was on his deathbed. I wanted to talk to Mario for my magazine that was published in the 1990s called The Excluded Middle, which we've mentioned. And after reading an interview with him, I tried to track him down. And what was to become a recurring theme, he somehow sensed that we needed to talk, that we should talk, and he sent me a copy of his book called Symbolic Messages while I was still in the process of looking for him. A short while later, I asked how he knew to send it to me, and he replied that you needed to see it. This is the letter he sent to me to the magazine. I think Mario talked to the spirits of the ether or otherwhere or somewhere or somewhen, and oftentimes wrote down what they were saying. For all I know, they told him to contact me. Although he did say he picked up my magazine at a local newsstand and decided to write when he saw I mentioned the interview with him that intrigued me. He began his college education in physics and mathematics, which his brother said he would have been a good physicist or mathematician. But by the time he arrived in Washington, D.C. in the late 60s, he changed his mind and entered the graduate program in psychology. What he told me was that he was disturbed by the work that scientists were assigned by the government. He earned his doctorate from the University of Delaware in 1969 in clinical psychology. He's actually, he became an expert on, his day job was being an expert on the problems and cures of drug abuse and treating patients, especially teenagers that were heavily drug addicted, and trying to get them off the drugs and out of the lifestyle they were in that was causing it. He served on several committees and panels for the state of Delaware. And in his psychiatric practice, as I said, specialized in treating the severest of the mentally ill. He's honored yearly by the Delaware Health and Social Services Organization, as you can see here, and also referenced in a government report on trends in drug abuse from 1998. Like everything else in the late 1960s, that period when he got his degree, the field of psychology was undergoing an upheaval as young doctors began to explore anything that would make the job of healing faster and more rewarding to the patients. Pazzaglini's longtime friend and psychiatric practice partner, Dr. Paul Poplawski, said, and he told me this, quote, "Western culture tries to keep everything fragmented and separate. And one of the things all of us were trying to do was introduce connectedness back into the process." I think that's where some of Morrow's other interests came into play. His other interests included alchemy, Kabbalah, tarot, and numerology. This is actually one of his numerological treatises. By the end of his short life at the age of 58, Mario had allegedly performed such feats as an incantation to change the course of a tornado that was heading towards his home. Three different people told me about this. I guess there was one friend that was with him when this happened, so who knows. He also made enough of an impression with someone or something that black helicopters occasionally shadowed him. According to friends and witnesses, he compiled a magical and simple system of his own devising, which may never be cracked. He did all this in the guise of a mild-mannered psychologist from Delaware. So his life was a deliberate enigma. He hid behind his professional persona to pursue these interests. In conversation with those who knew him best, this is the right slide? Yeah. It seems Mario heavily compartmentalized his interest, as I said. His associates in the scientific world had no idea he was interested in UFOs, aliens, and Eastern and Western occultism. He attended a conference on UFO abduction at MIT in 1992 and presented his research to the leaders in the field. But few of his friends ever knew about it. Almost no one knew he had notebooks filled with examples of strange symbols. Hundreds of his paintings and drawings filled his home, and actually, which I was privileged to see after his passing. His brother said, his brother Peter actually told me after he passed away, I believe in his next life he'll be an artist. I think he already was an artist, but I think he means as a profession. He wrote at least 2 self-published books. This one is Symbolic Messages, which is about what he called received writing. Those are symbols and scripts reportedly seen or channeled from aliens or other sources. Some say they're angels. And the other book was on his own system of numerology. They were both privately distributed to those who felt he could appreciate his work. So they are rare to find at this point. I was lucky to get this one sent to me. With his mother, he also translated a book from 1899 on Italian witchcraft. It was originally published, in 1899. So this republishing was in 1999, actually the year that he died. He retranslated a old text about the old religion, about the gospel, the witches in Italy, or as they're called. Our name for it is witches. In most esoteric traditions, the chosen are not able to only talk to the gods or fairies or demons or whatever, but to receive messages from them as well. Channelers, priests, or necromancers will usually dictate the messages to a secretary, or as Aleister Crowley did in 1984, write them down himself after hearing what he said was an audible voice dictate this book, the Book of the Law. Not surprisingly, these dictations are usually delivered in the language of the percipient. This doesn't necessarily mean, as skeptics would quickly point out, the words are coming just from inside our own heads. And Pazzaglini set out to prove this. He used the methods of a scientist and blended them with the insight of a magician to understand what alien writing was and maybe where it came from. It need not emanate specifically from aliens, whatever they are. I think I'll let Mario describe a little bit of his philosophy in this kind of a rare video that I found online a few weeks ago. I was not privileged to see this lecture, but this is him talking about his alien writing research. It's about a minute, and the audio is very bad, so you can follow along, hopefully, with the subtitles there, which aren't wholly accurate. But let's see what it says.
For a general frame here, the topic I'd like to address myself to is the topic of alien writing or received script.
Received script.
Distinguish this a bit from channeled writing because I'm, right now at least, more interested in the form of the message than the message itself. And that's for personal reasons. When I talk about alien writing, what I'm speaking of are a couple of categories, which I'll go over later. One is instances, which are rare actually, where people have actually seen pieces of craft or seen actual alien artifacts and have seen symbols on those artifacts. So the best example, of course, of that is the Roswell material with Jesse Marcel and his son, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., finding symbols on I-beams and then recording those. And I'll show you a picture that Jesse Marcel drew himself of those symbols. So that's one category. Another category are people who are shown material. In other words, for instance, Betty Andreasen, who was shown a book, owned the book for a while. The book was taken away, but with it being taken away, she received the ability to telepathically channel that script, and has channeled that script ever since. We're down the line here with her probably about 25 years. I personally have 500 pages of what must be a much larger corpus. So that's another category. A third category are people who just telepathically receive script, and that category is huge. People who, for some reason, have an event occur in their head, and we can talk a little bit about what that event is, and then begin to get an ability, whatever that ability is, to form alien language, alien letters in their head. So that's a third category, and then there are all sorts of subcategories.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we'll get into a little bit of that as we go on.
For a general frame.
In 1991, Mario published a short examination of the received script phenomenon entitled Symbolic Messages, as I showed you a little earlier, to report on his research and explain what he had found. In this book, he described the experience of a child who had received what he called angelic music, symbols for angelic music about the age of 4 or 5. He said these were words in music that the angels used to write down their songs. The child said, "They gave it to me. It just came into my head." In our interview in '95, when I finally got to talk to him, Mario said that he later found the letters were an example of, or very close to something called the celestial alphabet, or the angelic alphabet, which was published in the 16th century in the book Occult Philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who was a occultist at the time, obviously. After we'd known each other for about a year, he finally admitted the child was actually himself. So this is where this interest came from. He started getting this stuff seemingly beamed into his head, as he thought, from age 4. And he said he just wrote this incessantly, and he wasn't even sure what it meant, but it just kept coming out of him. Yeah, most practitioners in the occult training seem to get the calling from some inner need. But Mario was literally called upon to pay attention. And like all good initiates, he kept silent about most of it, except when he was doing his research. That's actually some of his channeled alien script as it developed as he got older. But how do we know that this stuff actually came from somewhere else besides Mario's head or the heads of the channelers or UFO abductees and the patients he was talking to? What for Mario, was it too much of a case of too much identification with the patient or the phenomenon? Maybe. But here's how he explained it to me. And this is a quote from Mario about what was going on with alien writing as he saw it, partially from his experience and partially from those of others who he was talking to. If you look at the brain, he said, it's clearly hardware and software, except it's different than a computer because in the brain, the software changes the hardware. It's constantly doing that. What the system does, I think, is either generates or connects with what's loosely called the soul. We could think of consciousness as a quasi-material that is organized by whatever this neural system is doing, and that the nervous system begins to act as both a container and a vehicle, an organizer of something. At the point, and the point here is that something is not bound by space-time as we understand it. It's just in contact with everything, just as your radio is in contact with everything. But you have to turn it, have it on and tune it. Something like that is happening. That's as simple as I can put it into words. This isn't a new idea, he said, but it's what looks like what's happening. The information exists, and I'm quite sure that the contact exists. But I'm not quite sure that material is always or even mostly worth anything. I talk in my book, it's Symbolic Messages, about how things are distorted as they pass through the nervous system. I think that's a huge source of distortion as that information, that supposedly outside information, comes through, and it has to get wrapped around our metaphors. He was using these, this is back to my talk, he was using these ideas in his magical training and his psychological training to use it to try and understand what was passing through him and how to travel a symbolic realm that surrounds and penetrates our space-time. He wasn't simply using rituals anyone could look up in a dusty old book. He was cutting his own stairway up to the hermit's roost. Mario was starting to get me interested in divination and suggested here's more communication, just training me. I think he was trying to train me. He suggested to buy a smooth bottom metal bowl, fill it halfway with water, and stare at the surface till something happened. I only got as far as seeing swirling cloud-like formations for a few minutes. The chaos is supposed to eventually coalesce into something recognizable for divination work, but he didn't mention this, probably to keep from front-loading me into influencing anything that might appear. This method operates on roughly the same principle as John Lilly's sensory deprivation chamber, which are still around. You can rent them. Mario actually experienced this under the guidance of the inventor, John Lilly. So it can be surmised that the forms are either coming out of the symbolic non-time and form-binded realm, or the mind is simply making up pictures for itself. The practitioner must decide where the gold lies. Probably both things are going on. Perhaps the deepest connection Mario felt was for occultist Franz Bardon. Bardon's second book, The Practice of Magical Evocation, is a compendium of theories about and the practice of calling up and communicating with various spirits or entities. Some of the effects and psychic attributes of the energies compare favorably with accounts of UFO abductees and witnesses. Perhaps some of the theories of Dr. Michael Persinger, who invented something called the God helmet. The God helmet is that thing on the right. This neurologist from Canada invented a way to stimulate the brain externally so that people would get, they would have hallucination or fugue states or altered states of consciousness just from this helmet. You can also bring up and connect the work of Paul Devereaux, who's in the lower left there. They both worked on Earth energies and their effects on the human brain, which may cause certain UFO experiences. They can also be, by extension, the cause of spirit encounters or inadvertent spirit encounters. It remains for someone conversant with a deep neurologic knowledge and funding, of course, in UFO research to provide a treatise on this subject, which I'd very much like to see. The first page of Symbolic Messages bears an almost innocuous inscription at the bottom. It reads, "To the companion in his tricks." Mario doesn't refer to this in the text, but in the course of developing his disciplines, he was receiving messages from something he called the companion. He seemed far too analytical to have let himself be knowingly fooled for long by either himself or this supposed contact. And the fact that the source referred to verifiable realities of which Mario knew nothing but were later confirmed seemed to cement his trust, despite the historical record of disinformation and error spread by contacts from whatever's coming from the other side, such as Ouija boards. That's a very notorious source of weird, bad, wrong, hoaxed information. He never mentioned seeing, meeting, or visualizing this entity, this companion. But Mario didn't talk much about personal matters unless you had a need to know. I talked to his friend Robert Chartowich, and he told me that Mario was convinced, this is a quote, that aliens were real and existed. Perhaps the companion was real in a psychological or psychic sense, and readily visible to Mario in the imaginal realm. Did not mean that the information was frivolous. If this companion ever did materialize into our four-dimensional frame of perception, perhaps it looks something like the entity known to occultists as LAM. Here's Crowley again. He claimed that he had encountered and sustained communication with this being for a few months in 1917. The year 1917, he later felt moved to draw a charcoal portrait of the thing sometime in the early 20s, which bears a startling resemblance to the Greys we know so well, minus the big eyes. Although my friend Regan Lee noticed that in the drawing, if you look closely above the little tiny eyes, there's these big swirly areas that actually kind of look like what we generally think aliens look like now. So who knows what Crowley was doing. Those familiar with Whitley Strieber and UFO abduction research will notice that although the eyes of Lam are small, Crowley and others who claimed contact with this thing said that all meaning and experience for the magician or whoever contacts them supposedly flows through the eyes of whatever this being is. And this is exactly what's described by many UFO abductees when recalling the giant almond-shaped eyes of their captors. By a strange coincidence, the rural cabin where Whitley Strieber claimed so many of his alien encounters was in New York Hudson Valley. New York State's Hudson Valley, about 100 miles from the Pazzaglini family home. I found this, I'm not going to read this because after he passed away, I went to his house and his partner said, "Why don't you go up in the room where he died and you can just sit there for a while and whatever, I don't know, about say goodbye to Mario or what." But I looked on the wall and there was this painting that Mario did, and it looks like him standing in these mountains somewhere, and he's got these tiny little gray alien things like holding his arms and showing them around, almost like he's either taking them on a field trip or they're doing something like the same thing to him. He hinted to me a few times that this kind of stuff had happened to him, but he didn't really talk about it too much. It appears he really didn't make any general assumptions about the origins of his messages and contacts, and it remained an open subject to him. As he said in the video, he cared more about what they were saying than how they were saying or where it came from. So many people have had UFO encounters, but few have seen actual written languages during their encounters. Mario's actual alien writing, which you see an example of down there, doesn't resemble much of anything that other UFO witnesses have reported, except there seems to be sort of a kinship to the writing of Betty Andreasson, who's claims like ongoing extraterrestrial abductions, etc., and interactions. Her family has apparently channels this writing too. Or as Mario said, she claimed to have a book with it in it, and then she learned it, and after that she would telepathically channel it, she say. One of the difficulties in verifying the authenticity, so-called, of an alien script is that if it resembles an earthly language or known terrestrial symbols, does this make it authentic? Perhaps the reason for this is that all input into human consciousness is filtered through an individual's learning experience, culture, and prejudice. And the messages must necessarily be rendered in a form that is understandable to the receiver, as well as those who need or want to hear it. This reminds me that the idea has been put forward that the UFO subject is some kind of colossal riddle that's being used to lead humanity into some sort of philosophical and scientific evolution. Perhaps the alien writing is some part of this program, if it exists, something on a human scale to allow us to interact with the UFO phenomenon and whatever is behind it. One of the earliest examples of what is purported to be an extra-human communication was received, channeled, or whatever you want to call it, by psychic medium Edward Kelly and his boss, Elizabethan court astrologer and Renaissance man, John Dee. This is a facsimile edition of all the messages they received, including a non-English related language. It was just all symbols. I think you would call it an ideographic language. That's actually Edward Kelly supposedly channeling an angel, Gabriel. Now Gabriel standeth up. He asked, "May I be bold and ask you one question?" "You may. Is the Queen of England alive or dead?" "She liveth." And then he adds, "I am nothing near the earth." So just reading these things is kind of amazing. It's like, what were they doing? Who were they communicating with? Actually, at the beginning of the book, there is an apology to the church saying this is not satanic. We are not doing things not approved by the church. And they talk about Jesus and stuff just to make it okay, so they can publish this book. The system of language that they either channeled, invented, or whatever you want to call it was called Enochian. It's still in use by occult practitioners today. It was actually used as a part of the basis for the Golden Dawn magical system, which is still being used as well. Developed in Victorian England in the late 19th century. It communicates concepts, at least I think it does, through the juxtaposition of symbols and their relationships to each other. It does not appear to be derived from any written language. That's a giant table of correspondences, which I have not been able to figure out, and I don't think I ever will. I don't know if anybody has, even though they claim they have. The language is claimed to have, among its adherents, to affect the reader or the user on important subconscious levels. This aspect of a alien or non-human language is also mentioned by UFO contactees and others who Mario interviewed, and we will talk about later, who would encounter or remembered their alien symbols. My training's in art history, so I will be referring to the message of art and how that communicates too throughout the talk. Like any truly great art, Mario's paintings and drawings operated on this level as well. On a subconscious level. Like Tibetan mandalas, they affect the viewer on a subconscious level and working on our psyches in ways that we can feel but often can't put into words. This is, of course, how some who see or channel non-human languages describe their experience. This is actually a page out of Mario's numerologic treatise. He went through all the numbers from 0 to 100 and did a piece of artwork based on each one. But I will end with Mario here by saying our conversations ended in mid-November of 1998 when his remission from prostate cancer took a turn for the worse. He spent his last few days with a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, like I said, who guided him through the conscious bardo states until his final hour. His brother Peters told me he thought that Mario was, quote, here for some purpose, and he had finished it. In the last 2 weeks of his life, he seemed to shun anything that would pull him back into this existence because he knew it was time to go. For myself and those who are privileged to know him, Mario Pazzaglini transcended the artificial walls between science and occultism and represented a place where we might be in the future when it's realized that the two disciplines may not be too different from each other and may have a lot to impart to each other as well. I'll probably go into areas here that many of you or most people will say, yeah, I know that, but your indulgence, please. The earliest written language we know of comes from Sumeria, about 3400 BC. The development came as a result of the tools available for writing, clay tablets and a wooden stylus. Around the same time, Egyptians were developing their early hieroglyphics, and the Sumerians, like a lot of civilizations, unsurprisingly used their first system to track food rations and other administrative issues. It eventually evolved into use as for religious purposes and literature, and finally into everyday use for things such as contracts. The first writings, as you probably all know, were crude pictures, and then cuneiform writing, which was a huge step, as it used markings to represent words and concepts rather than just pictures. This I just found out the other day, even though it was discovered in '93. I guess it was in the news. The Despilo tablet, carbon dated about 5200 BC, which puts it even earlier. So the impetus for writing probably goes back way before Sumeria. It's just that we don't have any examples of it till this was found in, 93. Of course, as you guys know, written languages always seem to have begun with pictures, pictographic writing, and progressed to using the image as a symbol for the sound. This is from Lebanon, 1500 BC, and ox was known as an alpu, became the A sound. Spoken language could be written out now with symbols which represented the sounds. Written language can now be reduced to about 20 to 25 symbols instead of hundreds. Other systems such as Chinese and Mesoamerican languages like the Olmec and Mayan remain basically pictorial. Oh, wrong computer. There we go. I wanted to talk about different ways of communicating ideas, either by language or whatever. The study of methods of symbolic communication is called semiotics, which you know. Ideas are represented as symbols. Represented as symbols are the basis for much of the history of art as well as language. We should keep these in mind as we look at some of these examples. Some of these may be endemic to the human mind, such as basic shapes that conform to archetypes, such as circles, crosses, triangles, and stars. There are also basic symbols which occur throughout history and cultures, like the sun or the wheel, spiral, water, grids, things like that. And this is actually, you guys probably know about this too, but it actually completely fascinates me. The Incan method of quipu, which was used in the ancient Incan Empire, they used it for record keeping and for long distance communication. Priests or people that knew how to read and tie these knots would put these knots on a string like this, and runners would just run across the kingdom, across to various places carrying these messages, and the only people that could read them knew what these knots meant. Some think that they were just used for counting, just for numerical messages, and others think that based on the type of knot, the arrangement of it, the length of the string, even the colors of the yarn that was or string that was used to create the knots, conveyed more than just numbers, and probably conveyed words, concepts. You know, is so and so paying their taxes, or somebody coming to invade, whatever. There's even different ways of, oh, there's another example, a really nice example of quipu, Q-U-I-P-U. There are also different ways of representing music, which we see in this supposed musical score written in 1958 by Giorgi Ligeti, the 20th century classical composer. It appears to be instructions to musicians that tell them what feelings and ideas to play the music with rather than the actual notes, which is kind of fascinating. This is just a personal favorite of mine because I'm interested in weird music and outsider musicians. In 1966, the trained opera singer Kathy Berberian, who was an expatriate American who lived in Europe, composed something she called Stripsody, which was sounds from comic strips and cartoons recited, and she drew them out on a piece of paper like this. And for fun, I've got a little video of her actually performing it. Hope you can hear it.
Blum, blum. Boing.
You stupid kite, come down out of that tree. Good night. Oh, chop, chop, chop. Glam, 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 glam. I'm Frida and I've got naturally curly hair. Do you like girls with naturally curly hair?
Good grief. Pop, 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 pop.
Okay, this goes on for like another couple minutes, but you get the idea. I wonder if it'll let me go to the next one. Here we go. Oh, Greg, how did you say this is pronounced? I forgot.
Mi'kmaq.
Mi'kmaq, that's it. I kept saying Micmac because that's the I had Canadian friends that called it that, but you said you actually talked to somebody from the tribe and they said pronounced Mi'kmaq. This is an example of, one of the, and you might be able to add to this, one of the few written languages developed by an indigenous North American culture, the language of the Mi'kmaq people of far eastern Canada. The symbols are described as a way to remember the elements of the spoken language rather than as a complete written language in itself. It's more like a mnemonic method rather than a written out specific language. Were you going to say something, Greg?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I just want to put these examples down showing, different methods of communication and how ideas can be represented by symbols and markings. I don't have a really good illustration for biosemiotics. I don't know if people know about this. Biosemiotics, the field of biosemiotics suggests that all living systems, from cells, bacteria, fungi, plants and animals, and all the way up to humans, are sign producers and interpreters. Signs or bits of information are basic to the units of this theory, are the basic units of this theory. The gene is a code, for example, for memory and self-representation. And the individual living body is a code for action and interaction with the real world and its ecology. Looked at in this way, communication and signaling may be going on as a result of life itself and is inherent to biology. This is a question that comes up, actually. Does language determine our reality? And I'm sure you guys have dealt with this. That's actually a piece from the movie Arrival, which I really enjoyed. Based on and Ted Chiang actually wrote it the guy that wrote the original short story, based it on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is one of the ideas behind the movie. It's a seemingly simple and elegant idea that states that language determines the reality of the speaker. The words you use create what you can see and conceptualize. I talked to an anthropologist friend of mine, and he said, while this is generally true, it's been found out it's not exactly what happens in actual practice. Because in the 1930s, a Russian neuropsychologist, Alexander Luria, researched the effects of culture and language on people's worldview and found out that indigenous people were able to easily adapt their languages and ideas to elements of modernization. such as improved farming methods and machinery and the like. So perhaps what we see with extrahuman or alien communication is an acclimation to new information that may be literally alien. So either the percipient is using a different method of symbols to accommodate the new information, or the non-human or alien source is, or both, possibly. Let's look at a couple of languages that are actually just made up and created. This is the language of space called Aui, invented by a psychologist named John Weilgert in 1975. He published a book on this language, and he also called it the language of space. Yeah, you can see there. What he was trying to do, he said, was to create a language that was universal and also able to create peace through understanding. He's apparently used it as a therapy method, or he did with his patients. And it uses symbols to represent concepts rather than an actual alphabet, although there are alphabetic equivalents there. And here's some, hey, Mark, did you actually invent the written form too of Klingon? I don't know if his mic's on.
Yeah, it's
think
on
he
now.
left.
No, I did
Oh,
not.
Who did the written form, or did they?
The short version is nobody knows. There was some original artwork for the first movie. We know who did that, but that was expanded. I don't know who did that.
Okay, so somebody probably extrapolated off that, whatever was they could see in the movie, and said, well, that must be Klingon, and started making an alphabet out of it.
Right. They matched the symbols made up for the movie were just symbols. They didn't mean anything originally. It was just artwork. But then somebody added a few more, modified the ones that were there, and matched them one for one with the sounds in the language that I came up with.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and that's been used ever since. But I had nothing to do with any of that.
Oh, okay. All right then. But the source is actually Mark, and I think it was done for Star Trek 3. Was that the first time they contacted you for that?
Right.
In 1984. And I think you also developed a Vulcan language as well?
Yeah, but not as much as Klingon, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you. All right. And you notice that these are it's alphabetic. They're symbols for sounds. Here's something interesting that has fascinated me for a while, called semic writing. Some of you may know about this. It's a category of communication with no conscious intended message. What a semic means is having no specific semantic content, or without the smallest unit of meaning. The meaning is left for the reader to fill in and interpret. I think it's instructive to look at these images in light of the alien writing examples I'll be showing, in order to appreciate the power of the human mind in creating ways to use symbols to communicate, as well as the role that what we refer to as art plays in communication. Since in many instances, art is a way to convey ideas that utilize our intuition and our subconscious. That's what the power of art is. This book was published in 1900. It's called From India to the Planet Mars. I can't remember. I think he was a psychologist named Theodore Flournoy. Professor of psychology at the University of Geneva. He spent 5 years attending the seances of someone calling herself Helene Smith, but her actual name was Catherine Mueller. She said she received spiritual messages through visual and auditory means, as well as raps on a table from what she called her spirit guide. Flournoy studied Smith and wrote of the different lives or cycles she inhabited, as she claimed to be the reincarnation of the daughter of an Arab sheikh, the favorite wife of a Hindu prince, and also the reincarnation of Marie Antoinette. She also claimed to have contact with people living on Mars and be able to speak the language which she wrote down during her seances. She also did sketches of what she said was the Martian landscape: greenish yellow sky, man with yellow complexion. It sounded like she was just dreaming or literally channeling this. And as Mario said, when things come through the human nervous system, they're changed quite a bit. And maybe most of it is from the human nervous system, but who knows? I cannot pass judgment on Catherine Mueller. So yeah, the language, as you see, the language basically bears a one-to-one relationship to Mueller's native language, which I think was either French or English. This is the kind of situation that made Mario suspicious that these types of languages were mostly created in the mind of the witness or percipient, possibly. So here's some of the alien languages that Mario talked about and researched and received. But first, in furtherance of what I was just talking about, sometime in the early 1990s, he asked a bunch of people to make up an alien language or make up create a made up language, like on the spot. What they would imagine that to look like. And pretty much all the examples he contained were just basically code for the English alphabet. They also contained what he called follows, where one symbol follows another. Symbol is similar shape or configuration. Follows tend to be found in made-up scripts, especially when they are said to be alphabetic. And most of these are, in fact, I think he told me just about all of them were alphabetic, and the one that wasn't was not even that complete, because there was no example to go on. Yeah, he used this actually as a guide to determine whether any supposed genuine examples of received languages were either consciously made up or contained so much influence from the recipient's native language they were probably not useful in his research. Here's some more examples from his experiment for people to make up language, showing the follows in those and how there's a one-to-one relationship with the English alphabet. This one's interesting. This one was possibly made up, probably is. Mario noticed that there were many follows in this example, as he says in the note there. And I thought that was interesting. Probably a lot of personal psychological noise here. Meaning the person who says they saw this or received it, there's a lot of noise from the thinking that it's just code for the alphabet or close to it, or using it as a template. So here's some more examples, more elaborate examples of these alien writings. But first, in his book, he actually listed the type of writings he'd found and what they looked like and how he could kind of categorize them. He actually categorized earthly written languages and symbol systems into 19 categories, such as alphabets, syllabic scripts, ideographic scripts, logos, shorthand, magical symbols, sigils, diagrams, codes, and even musical notation. He noted that humans use these systems for a variety of reasons, that they can be and often are combined and mixed. He gave this advice in the book that he had, the conclusion he had come to during his study. We should approach all scripts with an attitude similar to the one generated upon first seeing the Grand Canyon. It's a very big phenomenon, and God only knows what it is or what it contains. We need to use a large menu of possibilities and consider that some possibilities may not even be on our menu. Premature decipherment can be very misleading. Scripts that do yield to easy decipherment may be false or spurious, and not from an alien source, but from the head of a hoaxer or even a naive receiver. He categorized the writing example into basic groups, as you see here: alphabetic, syllabic, ideographic, and more complex that didn't fall into those other categories, and then into subcategories like line and dot, geometric and cursive. And then he commented on what are very common. It seems like cursive writing was very common, strangely enough, and a lot of line and dots too. Here's an example of what he called complex cursive, if you would look at that chart I just showed you. It's apparently not intended to be literally interpreted as in anything we normally think of as language. In fact, some of the most interesting examples to me, similar to this one, is the one that seemed to attempt to communicate on a subconscious level, as if they were works of art rather than a literal language, which is why I showed the Semitic writing. Yeah, the person that gave this to Mario actually said, you can see at the bottom, I received this in my mind after my first contact, close encounter of the second kind, a sighting. It's both technical and religious, how to manipulate minerals and light. It also actually looks a lot like Greg's shorthand, which I put an example of there. I don't know if Mario actually asked the people who had submitted these types of writing if they knew about Greg's shorthand, but I don't think they did. So it's a pretty specialized piece of knowledge, even in the 80s, 1980s and 90s when he was collecting these things. The person who submitted this unusual geometric writing referred to it as a religious secret script. A religious secret script. It has colors assigned to the symbols. You can see down there, that's what those letters are: blue, orange, red, green, violet. So when it was written out properly, it was supposed to have those colors. It's apparently not intended to be literally interpreted as what we normally think of language. In fact, some of the most interesting examples to me, oh, I already said that. The person who submitted this geometric writing referred to it as a religious secret script. It also has colors. These colors likely convey meaning as well. I suspect that this type of writing may be for personal use only. In other words, it may have been for spiritual contemplation or meditation for the person who sent it, and not meant for common usage. Yeah, like the last one, technical and religious, how to manipulate minerals and light. That may not have any meaning to anybody besides the person that channeled, saw, or otherwise received that script. This is a semi-cursive example, and although Mario tried to translate it, but it seemed it might have been alphabetic. Most of what he considered true alien writing was so unconnected to earthly languages that they may be truly untranslatable, although he tried, as we'll see a little bit later. Perhaps the group that figured out Mayan could try and take a crack at some of that's the Mayan language. This is kind of an important piece to me. It's the description of a cursive script. And Mario communicated what the person told him when he gave it, when he or she gave this to him. It's conjectured that the script represents a summary of 1, the internal state of the sender; 2, the intended internal state of the receiver; 3, the state of the relationship that is between the sender and receiver; and the message itself. Yeah, so it really does actually reinforce the idea that many of these symbols and languages may be useful only to the person, the specific individual who saw, channeled, or otherwise received them. And as I said before, this really sounds like a description of a type of art where the symbols are used almost as keys to opening up channels of communication rather than just sharing simple information. Or maybe that the information is meant to be appreciated almost as a result of the states of mind inherent in the percipients, if that makes sense. Oh, interesting also at the bottom, it says, another example of this type of symbol, it was decoded by tracing it out and thereby receiving a message like playing a record. So that may be an actual attempt to communicate as well. But like I said, I think it only has meaning for the person that did it or received it. This is a really weird one, a 3-dimensional geometric symbol. Good example of something that may be just for that person. It looks more like a sculpture actually than any real language. When Mario and I refer to sigils, I know there's different meanings of it. To me, a sigil is a symbol made up by usually an occult practitioner as an object of concentration to achieve some desired outcome, like a wish or a change in outlook or a change in circumstance or something like that. And the person makes it up themselves. I mean, it's consciously made up by the person. This one, the person said it came from outside of them. It came from some external source. These are symbols. Mario mentioned in the video that there were symbols supposedly on the wreckage from Roswell that everybody knows about. They said there were little I-beams and indestructible metal and stuff that looked like aluminum foil. Anyway, this is a drawing from the person, Jesse Marcel Jr., who was, I think, something like 6 or 7 years old when his father, Jesse Marcel Sr., brought home wreckage he said came from whatever the Roswell crash was. All the characters were in violet, he said, and this is what Marcel actually drew this in 1989, October 3rd, 1989, actually for Mario. This is, actually you can see this all over online, but this originally was originally documented by Mario Pazzaglini. I actually looked into this. Some people say that it was a weather balloon, which it possibly was, or a mogul balloon, which was a spy balloon. And that the symbols were symbols on Scotch tape. In the 1940s, there was actually Scotch tape for Christmas and Easter or whatever that had little rabbits or Santa Clauses or, bells or holly leaves on them or something. And I think that Marcel would have remembered what they looked like. So who knows? Who knows what those are? But it's an interesting piece of history. Let's talk about Betty Andreasson a bit. Mario was struck up a friendship and an ongoing research project with Betty Andreasson. Her and her family, I think in the 1960s, she says that some different sorts of aliens came to her and started communicating with her, telling her things, giving her information, giving her what she thought were lessons. These are chronicled in the Andreasson Affair books by Raymond Fowler. And as Mario said, Andreasson and her family have produced hundreds of pages of a cursive script that defies any kind of real analysis, at least as far as Mario was concerned. But he did tell me something interesting about her, about trying to figure out what her writings said, and he got a little bit of it. He thought that some of them looked like various medieval alchemical symbols, and he was able to translate one little sentence out of all these hundreds of sentences, at least the one he told me about. It's not really possible to decode all the alien symbols this way, but Mario once described how he dealt with it as he was interviewing Betty Andreasson. And I'll actually quote from him exactly what he said about it. There's some of her alien writing. What Mario did was he said, I sort of made a mental machine. I asked her to connect to her alien, and she did, meaning, to start channeling from that alien. Then with my machine, his trance state, I connected into that too and asked them what to do. He said that they said, make a few assumptions for their first piece of advice, their first piece of advice. That's exactly what you need to do if you were translating Etruscan, for example, he said. So they said, what does it look like? What does it look like to you? And I said, Greg shorthand and alchemical symbols. The reply was, where do you think the gold lies? So I said, I guess with the alchemical symbols. Thank you. Mario said, I have a dictionary of alchemical symbols, and there's hundreds in it. If I could weed out one factor, that was that these symbols from Andreasson are not archetypal. They're not circles or diamonds or whatever. They're complex. I picked a sentence that I thought was a sentence. I made the assumption that this was some whacked combination of alchemical symbols strung together. And what he translated from this small little snippet was this phrase: "If you want to make light solid, show it to the moon." Mario told me he was never able to make any quantum leap as into decoding its significance, but it's actually kind of pretty poetry. Although when I was writing this talk, I hadn't thought of this before. The question about where the gold lies was seemingly turned on its head with this, because moonlight is symbolically represented as silver as opposed to gold, the gold of the sun. So maybe Mario's companion was performing his tricks, as Mario said. This is a photo given to me, God, I think about 30 years ago, and I can't even remember the artist. It's on the back of the print, on the back of the photo print here, it actually says Susan's Alien Writing. All I remember is that she said that she was given the shapes and colors and symbols from an extraterrestrial source that she had contact with, and that had communicated this concept to her. And all the binary looking dots and all that and symbols made sense to her, but I think she said they would really not make sense to anybody else, which confirms kind of my ideas about a lot of the alien writing. This is a weird thing. In the late 60s, actually the mid 60s, a group of people said they started getting communications from some planet called UMO in a star system, like, hundreds or thousands or whatever of light years away. As it turns out, it was probably and almost certainly a hoax, although a very elaborate one that went on for years and involved people sending postcards from different countries in different languages, purporting to be messages from these people from the planet UMO. And this photo became connected to the UMO phenomenon or hoax, so purportedly taken on June 1st, 1967. It's got this strange symbol on the bottom of it. I don't know if that's been determined to be a hoax, but it probably is, especially looking at that light on the bottom. It looks like a plate being lit by an incandescent light. However, very strangely, in the Soviet Union in 1989, some children were waiting, I think, at a bus stop, if I remember this correctly, and they said this ship or UFO or something appeared, and something stepped off of it that looked like a robot. And on its midsection, I don't know if you can see my little pointer there, but on its midsection right here, right about there, there was a belt, and on the belt was that symbol, that same symbol. Very strange. I think it's also a astrological symbol. I don't know if it's for Jupiter or what, but it's not an unknown symbol. But I thought it was very strange that these kids who would assuredly never have heard of the UMO affair or hoax would independently come up with this symbol in what is supposedly an actual legitimate UFO encounter, close encounter. Here's another question that came up while I was writing this and telling a friend about it. If aliens are telepathic, why do they need to use language? Because a lot of people that report UFO encounters say that the aliens talk to them telepathically. Why would you need a language to communicate something that could be communicated much easier telepathically? What happens when someone can read your mind and know your future and past, as people say that aliens do? What do you need a language for? Since there's almost always some report of a distortion of time in UFO encounters, this indicates that possibly whatever these things are, at least in our reality, have some control over time that we haven't discovered yet. In this case, the written word may be a way to bypass the gulf that separates us and our experiences of time flow. There's also the elephant in the room that non-human intelligences may actually be attempting to communicate to us through a medium that we are familiar with. As I mentioned before, it may likely be a mixture of the aliens reaching out to us and our reaction is the only way that something can make sense to us and to communicate. This may be a case of the interaction being co-creative in the most creative and direct way possible. One pivotal scene in the film, 2023 film Asteroid City, directed by Wes Anderson, the actors are sitting in this room. And for no reason that people have been able to figure out, and conclusively, they start chanting, "You can't wake up if you never went to sleep." I think that this is a concept that is useful here. The shock and trauma of an apparent contact with non-human intelligence often wakes a witness from their old lives and ideas and philosophies. Many feel as if their lives are immeasurably enriched by their experiences. They only realize they were asleep after being shocked into this new reality. Many witnesses have their lives changed from a very brief encounter. And actually, coincidentally, this is an effect that any artist would like to have on an audience. Change your entire life in a few minutes. That's the ultimate piece of artwork. Art communicates. Alien writing can be looked at as an art form. This may be an attempt to communicate by using the audience, by making the audience part of the creative act. Great film directors and other artists don't explain their meanings. They let the audience make up their own minds. This is where it has its greatest effect. This is a series of drawings by Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky from 1926, illustrating the movements of a dancer, which I thought kind of looked like an abstract way of representing this, and also possibly the basis of some sort of alien writing. It looks like some of the examples. This actually Mario sent to me in 1997. I didn't ask him to do this. The magazine I had was called Excluded Middle, as I said. He said he channeled this from his from whatever that source that he called the Companion, that sent those symbols to him. And he said that was the symbol for Excluded Middle, and it was pronounced Velk Khan. It is still on my wall. In fact, it is in front of me now as I'm doing this talk. But ultimately, most of these examples I've shown may be best understood by the witnesses themselves, as I said. Most of these people don't seem to express any desire to make their communications public or publish them. It may be their effort alone to understand their extremely strange experiences and come to some peace with them if they can. Perhaps for this reason, one of the reasons, Mario made very little attempt to translate the examples he received, and perhaps we should consider this phenomenon as a personal journey for the witnesses, which can be enriched by considering alien writing the same way we appreciate a work of art for communicating things that can't be expressed in a human language. I don't think I can comfort myself that this is all made up, what we've been looking at. I think that something else inherent in the human psyche is deeply involved in this exchange. And perhaps in the same way that biosemiotics proposes that all life is actually communication. And finally, I often do have the feeling that this communication may be like 90 or 99% our interpretation of what is going on, and not a literal conversation as we are accustomed to, since the human mind will fill in the blanks in order to make sense of incomplete or apparently incoherent information. People who are interested in alien writing and researching it need to keep that in mind. This type of language, or whatever it is, stretches our ideas of what information really is and how our inherent tendency to see patterns can be reinforced, or if we are lucky, expanded to include less obvious and even more elegant methods of getting ideas across. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? Should I stop the screen sharing? I think I should. There we go.
Great.
Oh, good. I timed this okay. We've got a little over half an hour. I hope I can answer any questions.
I haven't seen any questions come into the chat, but lots of thanks for a great presentation, and I'll add mine to that. It's really interesting and a really kind of different way to think about language.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Yeah, somebody said that W.J. Smith said that the symbol was similar to the glyph for Uranus. So that's good. Yeah, that's the one I was trying to think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he said Jesse was about 10 or 12 years old. Yeah, because he was at that point he would have been, yeah, he's about 10 or 12 because he's born in the 30s.
Mhm.
The symbol is also the Chinese character for king. Although it's written on a, it's a horizontal or a vertical character, for what it's worth. Yeah, that particular one. I have a not a question so much, and it's in terms of your research. You've been studying this for a while, a long time. Have you ever looked at like declassified government documents in regarding extraterrestrial writing or anything like that?
I've looked for it, but in my memory, I don't think it's ever come up. I think sometimes the telepathic element is mentioned, but not the writing part. And you'd think that would be, it would be interesting to people that are interested in this, as we know recently. I mean, I'm sure I'm speaking here because of all this recent interest in the UFO subject in the last, since 2017 in December, when that article came out in the New York Times. That I think what that has done, even though I think it's not really, nothing's being revealed about anything. It just has to do with intelligence, military, and advanced research on weapon systems. I think that the fallout from that is people are more willing to talk about this kind of thing. So I think that if that is going to happen, it's probably happening right now because, academics, government people, and all that are now thinking it's not a subject of derision. It's something that should be mined for any kind of information or understanding we can get from it. And I think that's a good thing. So it may appear in the future, and if it has, it's still classified, and I haven't seen it.
There's a couple of items that I can forward to you that I know are declassified because I have looked at them myself, and they're not specifically, they're about alien, research into, alien
possible communication
symbols and things like this. Yeah, possible communication. And they are available, and I can forward them to you. Or I can tell you.
Oh, that'd be excellent.
You can find them. I think you'd find them very interesting because they actually do address things related to communication, although not directly. So I will make a note of sending you that.
Okay.
I think you'd find that very interesting. It's an attempt by the intelligence agencies essentially to understand the signals that are being sent, and from collecting signals from outer space and trying to understand exactly what they mean, and they approach alphabets, that type of stuff. So I think you'd find that very interesting. Yeah, you didn't
I'd like to
mention
see
in your
it.
presentation, so I thought you would perhaps weren't aware of them. Yeah, I'll be glad to do that.
No, I don't think I was.
And if I don't, shoot me a message. You have my email address, and I will let you know where it is. They're readily available, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Okay, so I can help you with that. So remind me if I don't forget.
Okay, thank you. I did actually remember. I mean, it's not that important because it's kind of silly, but there was a 1960s, I think, case in Florida, and somebody said a piece of paper was dropped out of a UFO and it had symbols on it. And I think the Air Force took a look at it and figured it out. And it was a really stupid message that was basically exactly one-to-one relationship to English. It had something like "Planet Mars, we miss you. When are you coming back?" or something like that. But that was actually in a government document. But it was basically in the Blue Book files saying, this was BS, and here's what it actually said.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if they can figure out,
this isn't Blue Book related, or what I'm referring to is not Blue Book related. So yeah, I'll go ahead.
I didn't think it was.
Take care of that for you.
Okay. There's the other thing I was thinking when you mentioned that is I bet they're interested because if there's a way to figure out any kind of code or cipher or some way to communicate in a different way, that might be useful as well. Because I think that's what a lot of this UFO interest, UFO interest is right now. It's like, okay, if we take this seriously, what can we get out of it that's usable? Even though it has nothing to do with the UFO subject, but we are inspired by our research to figure out what's going on. That could have applications in, actual research and change theories, etc. And I can see it already happening. I've gone to conferences with academics and they're talking about such things.
Okay.
One of the things that strikes me in listening to your presentation, but Greg, Mr. Bishop, is the sort of plasticity of the human mind to to be able to absorb or create these wide range of symbols that you've been presenting. And it's and many things that we've thought about language and methods of writing are kind of getting exploded by more recent research on the diversity of writing systems. I'm thinking about the Mayan scripts that were always had been thought of as pictographic. And then we had a presentation on Mayan writing a couple of years ago here at the museum, and came to realize that they were actually phonetic and they weren't pictographic at all. And they were, they might have been originally based on sort of a pictographic symbols, but they were phonetic symbols that were combined to make, if you knew what they were supposed to sound like, they would make a word in Mayan, and so things that may look pictographic really are not pictographic, and vice versa, and the fact that humans are able to learn many languages, especially if they start when they're young, it's just, again, the plasticity of the human brain to be able to absorb different kinds of communication is an interesting point, as well as, art as a form of communication, symbolic communication, So yeah, there's many forms of communication. It's just really interesting. And I was on a trip to Peru a number of years ago, just a vacation trip, and we part of the trip was they took us up in some small aircraft to look at the Nazca lines from the sky, which is really the only way to see them. You've got to be up pretty high up before you can really see the whole things, and that's still a mystery. Who created them? There were theories that they were created by aliens, but that's never really been
proven. There is. It hasn't been proven, and I think it's been proven that they were actually made by people with no problem, because there's sticks in the ground in some of them left over, which means they probably just, and a skeptical person in I think in Skeptic magazine, actually, who I don't usually like, but he totally made sense this time. He said, I took a small drawing and I just scaled it up. And then used rope and string so I could measure it properly, and then get the designs actually pretty accurate without him being able to see it from the air.
Yeah, interesting. Some of them are very geometric, some of the Nazca drawings, and some are very curvy and definitely represent or pictures of animals or too. There's a variety of it. So clearly somebody was trying to represent some meaning, I think, as well as to just being artistic, but we don't really know what it was yet. Yeah.
There's some out in California too. There's geoglyphs out here near Blythe, California, the Blythe intaglios, which are the same thing. They're just scraped. They're scraped into the substrate that's not been bleached by the sun over thousands of years, and they're still there. Actually, they've got fences around them now. But yeah, I took pictures of them for my ultralight once and posted it and just called it California Nazca.
Yeah, it could be. So thank you again for a very stimulating talk. You covered a lot of issues and different types of symbols that people had received or created, and different ways of representing meaning and communication. So I think it was very stimulating presentation. We appreciate you spending time with us to share all this information. I wonder if any of the other attendees would like to comment on the presentation. What
Yeah, don't be afraid to tell me I was wrong about something or to add some. This is why I asked Greg and Mark in the middle of the talk if they had clarification, and they did. So thank you so much.
I have this is the hypothetical question. So, depending on how you answer it, don't put too much into it. But if you were to encounter an alien for the first time, an extraterrestrial, how would you attempt to communicate with them? You, Greg Bishop. Have you ever thought about anything like that? I mean,
yeah, what I've thought about is if I could be understood, what I would ask. And what I would ask is, what am I to you? What do you think I am? And start the conversation that way. Because I would really like to know, whatever it is, how they look at me. Because it would be a great way to start out a conversation and try to realize, okay, how is this interaction going to work? Because a lot of a friend of mine, an anthropologist actually, at the University of Chicago, pointed out to me that a lot of communication starts, at least in earthly societies, with mimicry. You just do what the other person's doing, and that's how the communication starts. So, through a combination of mimicry and whatever, I would try to ask, what am I? What do you think I am?
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I guess others.
Well, the thing is, it's so, the way I see it, it is so connected to who you are as a person and what your education and your background and your culture is, that it has to be looked at in that way, not in a way where a language is a separate thing from those things. And also, as it said in that message, the intended state of the sender and receiver and all that's going on at the same time. So you kind of have to take that into account. And also, I mean, I don't know if I said it really at the talk, but I think what we're dealing with here we're dealing with this in life anyway. I mean, that's how we think. We're just dealing in metaphors. We're not dealing, I think it was Heidegger or Kant, so with the thing as it is, the thing in itself. We're just dealing with the symbology behind it. So we have to realize that, and realize that there's this huge wall of misinterpretation and assumptions that are going on there. So any communication that could happen through that giant wall of problems is going to be, it's going to have to be taken, not with a grain of salt, but taken in. It's like, okay, I'm going to need more information at some point in order to be able to make sense out of this, at least for myself, because ultimately all sense is made on an individual level.
I guess I feel dubious that these sets of symbols that are so English based are truly alien writing, because that it just seems like the cultural basis, it wouldn't exist,
Yeah.
I mean, it's more like that would be something that someone created in their own mind. They may have gotten, people get ideas from all kinds of sources, and you don't really want to poo-poo anyone's original ideas, because why are one person's ideas any better or worse than anybody else's ideas? You need to have space for original ideas. But as to where they actually came from, if it's just sort of modification of something they've already encountered in their own culture, I don't know if that would be considered truly alien or not.
Yeah, well, I discussed that. I said when he, and I mean, this makes sense to me. If you see something that has kind of a one-to-one relationship to the language that you're speaking and you're communicating in, it makes it a little less likely that it's possibly coming from somewhere else, because it is so related. And if it is, there's so much psychological noise and cultural noise there that we couldn't even figure out what that thing in itself is, what the source is, because it's so much you trying to figure out what it is and not what it is, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Now we had a talk. There's this one group that I participate in, the International Network of Language Museums, an interesting group, and it's people from around the world, from every continent practically now, except Antarctica. We have members, and they talk about museums devoted to language in their country. And one of the ones was recent ones really interesting was it's an excellent museum, the Hangul Museum in Seoul, South Korea. That's all related to the Korean language, and not just the language, but the writing system Hangul, which was invented for the Korean language, because previously they had been using Chinese characters, which really didn't fit the Korean language. And the king
or culture, yeah.
Yeah, and the king of Korea at the time is in the 1400s. He wanted to expand literacy among the Korean people. And he, with some assistance, created the whole Hangul writing system, which is based entirely on like pronunciation of Korean, spoken Korean.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, Korea has among the highest rate of literacy of any country in the world now, because their system is so one-to-one based on how people speak, the sounds that people make in their speech. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, even in English, for example, those of us who are native English speakers are just used to this, but if you're not a native English speaker, there's variation in like how even individual letters or words are pronounced. It's not very consistent, really. Using the alphabet that we use for English. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that there are, say, sentient beings in different parts of the universe who have different sounds and ways of communicating. And so I applaud you for really looking into this. I think it's a good subject, and it's mentally very stimulating to think about, I feel.
It is. I mean, it combines two of my interests. It is an offshoot of my main interest, which is the UFO thing. And I don't really think about the UFO thing the way that a lot of people do. I think of it in terms of possibilities, not in terms of agreed upon realities. Because once you agree upon something, you've lost your ability to interpret or see it in a different way or something like that. And what could be more non-interpretable or non-agreed upon than some other, consciousness that has really nothing to do with how we go about things. So if you make assumptions, I consciously don't make assumptions and try to keep that open all the time, and also keep a sense of humor as well. And so that's the basis of everything I do. Right now, I'm concentrating on art and the UFO subject and the humanities, because most people, they look at UFOs and they think, oh, it's a machine in the sky. So of course, people think about it in scientific and technological terms. But what it does to people having these kind of experiences is not a scientific or technological thing. It affects people, as I said, the way that art does, or a song or a poem or a sculpture or a painting or whatever, something that talks to you in a way that is not language and affects you more deeply. And I think that looking at the UFO subject in terms of how does art and how do art and the humanities deal with how with the human condition or the human experience, how can that be used as a tool to understand the UFO thing a little bit better? So that's what I'm working on right now, which is why my alien writing talk was infused with talk about art and communication through art.
One of the things
that subject matter expert now. Sure. Mark,
I was going to say what yeah. No, one of the things that occurred to me is writing, in my mind, means at least the way we use it on Earth, is a visual representation of the spoken language. It's not a thing separate from the spoken language. Okay, so for the alien writing, are you assuming, or people who look at this stuff assuming that it's a visual representation of something else, or is it a thing in its own right that's not matched up with something else?
I think it's a thing in its own right in the way you say that, and that it is an attempt to communicate or explicate ideas that can't be done in a human language. And it can be more done with a collection of symbols or feelings you get from symbols. Like I said, as looking at, I can describe a painting, but I can't describe how it makes you feel in ways where you're actually feeling it. And I think that's what people that receive this alien language are trying to do. How do I represent what I'm trying to understand and how I feel in something that is written out? And to them, it came from the alien or the angel or whatever. But I think it's coming from within them in an attempt to understand whatever it is that's coming into them or they think is coming into them. And if you assume it is coming from somewhere else, how else are you going to conceptualize things except that telepathically, as I said, or in a way that is not descriptive in a way in alphabetic languages or languages that uses sounds, as you say, a written language to represent sounds. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, following up on that, for all these, the thought that occurred to me is kind of related. Is some all the examples you gave, people sending in their drawings, if we want to call them that, of what they've received. Do you know, or does anyone know, are the native languages of these people anything other than languages that are represented by alphabets?
No, they're not. These are all English speakers, I think, from the United States, at least in that study that he had, that one little study, which is obviously why it had this one-to-one relationship with the English alphabet. So they didn't say what the sounds or the symbols or anything were.
Now, when talking about the relationship between written language and art, one of the traditions in Asian art is that you would have a picture, that's nature or something like that. And then there's also some writing in Chinese, Japanese, on the painting that can be poetry or something from some Chinese philosopher that relates in some way to what's depicted in the painting. So they have this like a direct connection between the written language and the art itself. And
I don't know if you can see that.
Uh-huh.
This is, you can't really see it. It's from a temple in Kyoto.
Okay.
And it's one of those sticks that monks use to hit people when they go to sleep, when they're in meditation.
Okay.
I showed that my mother's Japanese. Well, she was. I showed this to her and I said, "What does that say?" And she said, "I have no idea what that says. Those aren't even letters." So it's a monk's interpretation of what the letters might be, and they have meaning to the monk or whoever's using it, but not, my mom said, "I have no idea what that says. That doesn't say anything." So yeah, there's a lot of Zen calligraphy that's like that, as you're describing.
Yeah, there's examples of that I've seen with Japanese, with Cherokee. We made a movie, I don't know, 10 years ago or something about constructed languages. It was actually more about the people who do constructed languages. And part of that focused on writing and very creative ways of incorporating the meanings, in the sense that you were just talking about, the meanings and the feelings and all that, into the written symbols, or making use of modifications of the written symbols to incorporate that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. That you would want to go beyond what a written alphabetic language could communicate in an area where there's a symbol, like a circular symbol is a symbol of wholeness or whatever, or you know, a wavy symbol is a symbol of water. And you don't have to say water, but it gives you the feeling of drinking, being, swimming in, or, you know, seeing fish in it or something like that, rather than just saying the word water or spelling out the word water. If that makes sense. There's a, Sean actually, there's a comment. There are critters that communicate through smell. Look at how dogs and wolves and whatever pee everywhere, making trees into community bulletin boards. If there are aliens, maybe they don't communicate visually or audibly, but through some other sense like smell or taste or texture. My anthropologist friend actually pointed this out to me, the same thing. He said, how do ants communicate? They communicate through pheromones. And in this way, they build giant colonies and they act as this collective. He said, what if you were able to throw the pheromone in there that says build 10 more rooms? They'd go and build 10 more rooms and they wouldn't even realize that they were doing it for any reason other than that they were supposed to build 10 more rooms, because their communication consists of, I smell this thing, therefore I do this thing. So, you know, that may be going on as well. And we're still trying to jam it into a, not smell, but another method of communication, telepathic or whatever, subtle communication. And we're trying to jam it into this language thing. So who knows? So, you know, I don't know how you would go about communicating in another way. We only have certain ways of communicating. It's vast and it's variegated, but it's not everything. And it's not the only way to communicate amongst conscious biological beings.
Yeah, could it be that these aliens could go out there somewhere? These aliens, however they communicate amongst themselves, is different from what these people are receiving from them. In other words, human beings communicate in a certain way. So if the aliens want to communicate with the human beings or convey something to the human beings, they have to do it in a way that human beings understand or can cope with.
Exactly.
So if the aliens are dealing with pheromones or telepathy, that's not going to help. That's not going to work. So they translate, maybe. You know.
No, I'm sure if there is an attempt to communicate, and I hope I made this clear in the talk, the attempt would be in a method that made sense to us, because that's the only. Otherwise, it would be, you know, it would be either not noticed or no sense would be made out of it. And if there is some communication going on, I think we're only getting a whisper of what that communication might be because of all the baggage we bring in with a message that might be coming in. So if we do get a message that's useful, it's probably, it's almost by accident, because there's so much interpretation going on based on what we think should be interpreted and we think should be happening and how we conceptualize things, which may not be a way that some other consciousness from some other planet might conceptualize something, or even on this planet for that matter.
Which might make things difficult. One of the things making things difficult to interpret or translate or decode or something, because we're assuming, or maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like we're assuming that these squiggles, whatever you want to call them, somehow represent words. Maybe they don't.
No, they may represent ideas or emotions or
and combinations of various things.
Yeah, Sean says, have you read Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang? Yes, I have. That's the story that Arrival is based on.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story. The story is just as good as the film, even though they're not exactly the same, I think. I mean, I just really enjoyed the fact that Arrival was not, there's an invasion coming, they're going to shoot us all up. And it was just kind of like, what is the nature of time? What is the nature of choice? And if you know the future, would you still, you know, be okay with living through it, even though you had no choice in the matter? And how do these beings know that? And how would they communicate that to us? And it was very unobvious. The entire premise of the movie and the way it was carried off was not the way it's usually done, which is that uniqueness really attracted me to it.
Yeah, actually, in the short story, if I remember correctly, that's different from the movie, is these aliens had two languages, if you want to call it that. One was based on noise, and one was based on visual. Okay. And the short story had the advantage of not having to do not having to show the visual, right?
Yeah.
The movie makers had to deal with it, and what they came up with was gorgeous. It was beautiful.
It was gorgeous. I've
But
got
the
a
two
T-shirt
languages,
with one of the symbols
visual
on it.
one, yeah, the visual one and the spoken one in the book had nothing to do with each other. It was two separate modes of communication.
That's
One was
right.
not
They were for
the other.
Yeah, they were for separate reasons, for separate utilities. Yeah.
Right.
Well, perhaps
Anything else?
perhaps the clash of cultures, on our own planet between is a model in a way for thinking about trying to understand alien writing and alien languages, because I mean, unfortunately, there have been many, many sad episodes throughout human history where one cultural group comes into contact with another cultural group and they don't understand each other at all. And they usually end up with a lot of people getting killed because of the lack of communication. I mean, I know some years ago I taught a course on Japanese history, and an important episode from American perspective anyway, the arrival of the so-called black ships, Commodore Perry arriving in Japan. And so just to make the course different, I presented the students with some information about how the arrival of these black ships, as we call them, the American ships, were perceived by the Japanese, who had been isolated for centuries, really, and trying to figure out what these people were about and what they were going to do and how they should react to them. There were a lot of debates going on the Japanese side that I really never taught in an American history class. But, I think it's kind of like us trying to figure out what is this alien writing about, where is it coming from? What are they trying to present to us? If you accept the fact that it is coming from some aliens from some other universe, or
could be.
Yeah, it's complicated. Again, thank you so much for a very stimulating talk. We really appreciate your spending time with us today. And thanks to all the people who attended the program today.